the feeling usually shows up on a Sunday night. Not as a crisis, not even as sadness, just a weight. You're sitting there scrolling, half out of habit, half because stopping feels worse. And the more you look, the more you start to sense something underneath everything. A quiet thought that isn't dramatic enough to call despair, but isn't light enough to ignore. What if none of this actually matters? Not in the edgy way people say it online, not as a joke, not as a personality. I mean it in the most ordinary way possible. You study, you work, you plan, you try to stay disciplined, you keep a mental checklist of what you're supposed to become. And the world answers back with numbers, grades, metrics, followers, salaries, rankings, the performance of your life, constantly measured by something outside of you. At first, it looks like clarity, because numbers feel honest, they feel clean, they feel like certainty. But over time, something happens. The same system that promises meaning through achievement also teaches you that you are replaceable inside it. There's always someone faster, someone more optimized, someone who learned the same skills younger, with less effort and with more confidence. And if you're not careful, you start to live like you're being compared even when nobody's watching. That's the part people don't always say out loud. It isn't just the pressure to succeed, it's the pressure to justify existing. To prove, every day, that you deserve to take up space. And that's where nihilism stops being an idea from philosophy books and starts feeling like a modern atmosphere. Because nihilism isn't always the loud statement. Nothing matters. Sometimes it's quieter than that. It's the feeling that everything is moving, everything is updating, everything is accelerating, and you're standing still, trying to understand why you're even running. It's waking up and realizing that your goals don't feel like yours anymore. They feel like something you inherited from the world around you. And then, late at night, when the screen finally goes dark, when the noise stops, you hear the question again. Not as a threat, not as a collapse, but as a kind of cold honesty. What if none of this matters? For a long time, I treated that thought like an enemy, because if nothing matters, then what's the point of trying? What's the point of building anything? But I've started to suspect something else. Maybe the fear isn't that nothing matters. Maybe the fear is what happens when you finally admit it and realize you're still here. Still breathing, still conscious, still able to choose what to do with the next hour. And that's where this video begins, not with the conclusion that life is meaningless, but with the moment you look straight into that possibility and notice it hasn't destroyed you. It's just standing there, like an open door. There's a moment most people avoid. It happens right after the thought settles in, right after you stop fighting it. If none of this matters, then what now? Most people interpret that sentence as defeat, as collapse, as the beginning of apathy. But that interpretation hides an assumption. It assumes that meaning must be handed to you. From tradition, from culture, from achievement, from some external system that confirms your worth. When those structures feel unstable, the mind panics, because without them, there seems to be nothing holding everything together. But here's the turning point. If nothing matters in any ultimate cosmic sense, then you are no longer being judged by one. The scoreboard disappears. The invisible evaluator vanishes. And what remains is something most people overlook: space. When meaning is imposed from the outside, your role is compliance. When meaning collapses, your role changes. You are no longer defending your existence, you are deciding what to do with it. This is why the phrase, "nothing matters," is psychologically unstable. In a fragile mind, it becomes permission to disengage. But in a stable one, it becomes the ultimate security bypass. Because if nothing is sacred by default, nothing is forbidden by default either. You are free from cosmic expectation, free from inherited narratives, free from the pressure to justify your preferences in universal terms. That doesn't make life easier. It makes it yours. The anxiety you felt before wasn't proof that life was meaningless. It was proof that you were trying to meet standards that were never neutral to begin with. When those standards dissolve, you don't disappear. You remain conscious, capable of choosing. And that is the uncomfortable truth most discussions of nihilism avoid. The void doesn't erase you. It removes your excuses. If nothing matters, then your small decisions matter exactly as much as anything else ever could. The walk you take, the book you read, the skill you practice, the person you decide to care about. Not because the universe guarantees their importance, but because you experienced them. And that shift from searching for ultimate validation to accepting immediate experience is where nihilism stops being an abyss and starts becoming leverage. This is not optimism, it's clarity. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Which leaves only one question: if nothing matters by default, what are you going to build anyway? There are two ways to respond to nihilism. The first is passive. You conclude nothing matters and you let that conclusion dissolve your initiative. You disengage, you drift, you reduce your world to distraction and comfort. But there is another response, one that is quieter and far more demanding. If nothing carries automatic meaning, then meaning becomes an act. Not a discovery, not a revelation, an act. This is what I mean by active nihilism. It's not denying the void, it's refusing to be intimidated by it. You stop asking, what is the ultimate purpose of this? And start asking, is this worth my time? The difference is subtle. The first question demands cosmic justification, the second demands personal honesty. Active nihilism doesn't pretend that your choices are eternal, it accepts that they are temporary, and chooses anyway. You read the book, not because it will define your legacy, but because it sharpens your mind now. You build the skill, not because it guarantees status, but because competence feels real in your hands. You form the friendship, not because it fulfills some grand narrative, but because shared experience matters in the moment it happens. Notice what disappears in this framework. Comparison weakens, perfection loses its grip, external validation becomes optional. Because you are no longer trying to win a universal game, you are constructing a local one. And local games are powerful. They are small enough to control, clear enough to measure on your own terms, flexible enough to change. Active nihilism is not chaos, it is selective commitment. You choose what deserves your attention, you choose what deserves your effort, you choose what deserves to shape you. And you accept that these choices are not sacred. They are provisional, they can evolve, they can be discarded if they stop serving growth. This is where freedom becomes uncomfortable, because if meaning is self-authored, then responsibility cannot be outsourced. You can't blame tradition, you can't blame society, you can't blame fate. You are not constrained by ultimate purpose, but you are accountable to your own direction. And that is heavier than most people expect. It requires discipline without mythology, effort without guarantees, consistency without applause. But it also removes something corrosive, the fear that you are failing some invisible standard. When you build from nothing, there's nothing above you to disappoint. That doesn't make life grand, it makes it deliberate. And in a world that measures everything, deliberate action is rare. So active nihilism is not about declaring that nothing matters. It's about recognizing that nothing is pre-approved and choosing carefully anyway. You don't escape the void. You use it as a foundation. There was a time when the thought, nothing matters, felt dangerous. Like stepping too close to the edge of something you might fall into. But the more I sat with it, the less dramatic it became. The void is not loud. It doesn't pull you. It doesn't swallow you. It just exists, indifferent, open, unimpressed. And eventually you realize something strange. It was never chasing you. You were running from it. Because if nothing carries guaranteed meaning, then the responsibility shifts. You are no longer searching for a script. You are writing in blank space. That blank space can feel unsettling, but it is also honest. There is no cosmic audience, no final evaluation, no ultimate scoreboard waiting to confirm that you did it correctly. There is just experience, moment by moment, choice by choice. And strangely, that realization lightens something. If nothing matters in an absolute sense, then small things are no longer competing with something larger. A conversation, a page of notes, a walk without a destination. They don't need to justify themselves. They simply need to be lived. I didn't stop fearing nothingness because I disproved it. I stopped fearing it because I stopped treating it as a threat. The void is not a hole in reality. It is space, and space is not an enemy. It is room. Room to think without permission, room to build without applause, room to choose without guarantees. That doesn't solve existence, it doesn't turn life into a grand narrative, but it removes the pressure to pretend that it already is one. So if you ever find yourself awake at night staring at the quiet question, what if none of this matters? Don't rush to silence it, sit with it. You might discover that the absence of imposed meaning isn't emptiness at all. It's freedom.